Friendships are one of those kinds of links that I take pretty seriously once I've really connected with someone. Making friends, especially as an adult, can be incredibly challenging and often comes down to how much free time you have to spare between responsibilities, as well as what your personal values and hobbies are. It's easy to get bogged down in the daily grind of life and end up having no time or energy to go out and meet new people. I don't have a ton of friends, which may surprise you. I just happen to know a lot of people. And it isn't as though I can't make friends, I just have a hard time opening up to new people, and I'm not a fan of vapid small talk. So when I do make genuine friends, I cherish them. Even more so when someone crosses that threshold from being just a standard friend to becoming a best friend. This is someone that genuinely understands you, someone that sees you and has your back through thick and thin. It's the kind of connection that's difficult to find and impossible to replace. With that in mind, today I want to talk about the interesting, relatable, and unfortunate friendship between Gojo and Geto from Jujutsu Kaisen. But before I do, I want to give a big shout out to these wonderful people for their continued support over on Patreon, with a special nod to Celestial Tier backers Super Sunset, This One Snack, and Angus Clydesdale. If you'd like to see videos early, see your name in the credit scroll, or snag a portrait for the scroll like several of the folks here, head on over to the Somewhere Past Never Patreon page where you can show your support for as little as $1. Also, I always forget to mention this these days, but if you're looking to interact with the community more, you should come join the Discord server. Everyone's pretty friendly and we love to see new faces. On top of that, if you've been enjoying the avatar artwork I'm using on this channel, or the thumbnail artwork for my second channel, which you should also go subscribe to, links below, then please consider having some artwork commissioned by my good friend and channel artist Uka. She does stellar work and is fantastic at taking basic ideas or descriptions for a piece and turning it into exactly what you were envisioning. I'll be leaving a link to her social media in the description and pinned comment, so please go show some support and get something cool made in the process. Now, before we jump into today's topic, I do want to go ahead and throw up a huge spoiler warning for portions of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, as well as tidbits of the movie. If you aren't caught up on the anime or haven't seen it at all, I genuinely want you to go watch that first. Jujutsu Kaisen is one of my current favorites and I'd feel bad spoiling major character elements. That being said, although there will be spoilers here, I will be kind of tiptoeing around more specific events since I plan to make videos about Jujutsu Kaisen in the same fashion as my Yu Yu Hakusho video essays, so I won't be covering things as in-depth here. I'm going to be focusing specifically on Gojo and Geto's friendship. At most I'll add details for context, but otherwise don't expect a play-by-play. With all of that out of the way, let's hop on in. The bulk of what we're going to talk about today happens during the prequel arc Hidden Inventory Premature Death, where we get the majority of the characterization for the pair's friendship. Right away, we see that Gojo and Geto currently maintain stark differences in perspective during a scene in the gymnasium. Geto exhibits a strong sense of duty toward protecting non-sorcerers, explaining that the mental calm of the general public is crucial to keeping down the number of cursed spirits. After all, cursed spirits are born of the negative energy that leaks out of humans and builds up over time. Gojo replies by saying looking out for the weak is exhausting, but Geto retorts with the notion that survival of the weakest is how society should be, basically saying it's the responsibility of the strong to protect those who can't protect themselves. What's interesting here is that after Geto makes his worldview clear, the shot he takes lingers around the rim before falling out, which is great symbolism of the doubt that has already begun taking root inside of him unbeknownst to the audience or even himself. This is when Gojo makes his stance known, remarking that assigning reasons and responsibility to strength is something the weak do. By this he means that by siding with that logic, it only affirms one's own weakness, because if said person was strong enough to protect themselves or others, they wouldn't need to assign the task to anyone else or come up with reasons why it's someone else's responsibility to protect you or your loved ones. Just like Geto, after his argument, Gojo takes a shot at the hoop. His shot is aggressive and goes into the hoop because at this point in his life, he truly believes this. Yet, despite their sibling-like squabbling, it's more than obvious that these two are genuinely friends with similar senses of humor and mutual respect for one another. Something that caught my eye here is that in this era of his life, Gojo says we are the strongest and not I'm the strongest. It's cocky, but he's also giving Geto his flowers here. Gojo is an extremely powerful character, yet he recognizes his best friend is no slouch either. It's small details like this that characterize their friendship all throughout their shared story arc in a way few recent on-screen friendships have accomplished. On their way to an important mission they've been assigned, Geto takes the time to address Gojo's arrogance, telling him that he should be more humble and polite. Even though this seems like a rude thing to bring up on paper, Geto's tone is less about lecturing Gojo and more about recognizing his friend's life could be a bit smoother if his personality wasn't so abrasive. He rightly recognizes that Gojo's personality is rooted in his strength and the status it has afforded him, and most people won't have the patience to push through that arrogance the way Geto has. Geto truly sees Gojo for who he is and just wants others to see that too. An explosion kicks off the episode's main set piece, and despite Geto being caught up in the blast radius, Gojo shows no real concern for his safety, not out of callousness or dismissal, but because he understands and respects the strength of his best friend. The way he asks if Geto is still alive on the phone is purposely cheeky in tone, and Geto's response isn't irritated or anything, it's the equivalent of, "Yeah, I'm good, bruh." Something important to note that characterizes both men even further is that unlike the people around them both in the current and future timelines, Gojo and Geto always refer to one another on a first-name basis. In the ending of this stretch of episodes, we get to see examples of Gojo and Geto being friends in a genuinely relatable way. From gaming at an arcade together, to annoying each other by poking the other's face, having meals together, etc. It's wholesome to see, but that's only until you remember where their story is going. One thing I love about these two is their shared and often goofy sense of humor. Like when Rico, the person they're trying to protect for reasons I'll go into in one of the analysis videos, slaps Gojo and tells Geto his bangs are weird. What do? They hold her up and twist her like they're trying to wring out a washcloth. Seeing these characters so casually do this had me laughing pretty hard upon first watch. They even go on to ignore her during one of her speeches, with Geto noticing Gojo change the wallpaper of his cell phone. It's such a small detail, but think about it. That means Geto is so familiar with seeing Gojo's phone that he was able to instantly recognize something was different. It's the same kind of vibe as a friend noticing your hair is different, or noticing you showed up wearing new glasses, etc., even when no one else seems to have noticed. That's some genuine best friend shit right there. There's a moment a little later that's also small but shows how close the two are when, after allowing Rico to go to school, Gojo just casually leans on Geto's shoulder, who just continues talking without any real concern. I don't know about you, but if you aren't someone I rock with heavy, having you lean on my shoulder like this would probably annoy me, and my first instinct would be to shrug you off and take a step away to re-establish that personal space. There are only a small handful of people that could do this while I'm talking, and I wouldn't have a problem at all, in the same fashion as Geto. There's no discomfort or awkwardness the way you often see with other anime characters when someone randomly leans on them or throws their arm over their shoulder. The way the two speak to one another when they're arguing, when they're joking, and even when they're taking things seriously is just that of two friends who know everything about each other. Further down the road, during their mission to protect Rico from those who intend to kill her, Geto demonstrates not only knowledge of Gojo's technique, but a concern for Gojo's well-being. By this point, Geto has noticed that Gojo hadn't released his technique since the previous day and has yet to even sleep, with those two details combined likely putting a decent strain on the sorcerer. Geto further deduces that Gojo has no intention of sleeping that night either, in order to continue protecting Rico to the best of his ability. Gojo waves off the concern with a throwaway joke, but then simply replies that Geto is also there too. This simple line gives valuable insight into just how much Gojo trusts Geto, essentially saying that the reason he can be at ease and feel comfortable pushing himself so hard is simply because his best friend is present. He honestly trusts that if all else fails and things go sideways, Geto will be right there to have his back. Gojo doesn't even think twice about it, and Geto appears satisfied by this answer, dropping the subject with a soft smile. I'm sure every one of us has had a moment like this, where the only reason you feel comfortable in what you're doing or comfortable pushing your limits is because the one person you trust with everything is right there beside you. Facing adversity and the prospect of failure is easier to do when you know you've got a ride or die that's there to catch you if you stumble or jump into the fray if you need help. There's a comfort to it that's difficult to describe. Later on, when Gojo does finally release his technique, he's attacked by the antagonist of this mini-arc and subsequently, albeit briefly, defeated, which leads to the successful assassination of Rico. The arrogance deriving from his strength, something Geto had asked him to reel in earlier, had finally swung back around to bite him. After everything goes down and the pair recover Rico's body from an underground compound, Gojo admits that he screwed up, setting the groundwork for him to become the version of himself we know from the present-day timeline. Gojo then floats the idea of killing a room full of Star religious group believers, who are all standing around applauding Rico's death. Because of their beliefs, Rico's death was the best possible outcome for them, and watching all of these people applaud the lifeless corpse of a young girl Gojo had formed a bond with over the course of protecting her was leaving him numb. Gojo tells Geto that with the headspace he's in, he doubts he'd even feel anything about killing them all. Geto shoots this down, but is clearly shaken by not just Gojo's idea, but everything that led to the current situation to begin with. He tells Gojo that because the higher-ups who even know about the world of Jujutsu sorcery aren't present, there wouldn't be a point. Everyone in the room were just common believers. Gojo retorts by asking if there really needs to be a point to it, and Geto says that it's very important that there is, especially for a Jujutsu sorcerer. Here, Geto is basically saying that there needs to be a reason for killing others, especially for people tasked with protecting. Having no reason is a slippery slope that can easily lead to mindless slaughter and meaningless death, which is why all over pop culture you see killing referred to as the thing you can't come back from, even when a character has a reason. But this also expands to the idea of why Jujutsu sorcerers do what they do. It's a dangerous job full of death and despair, so it's very important to have a reason for why you're willing to go to such lengths to protect people who will never know, appreciate, or thank you for the inevitable sacrifices you'll be making. This moment, seeing Riko's corpse again and witnessing the congregation of believers celebrating her death, is when the seeds of doubt for his work and hatred for non-sorcerers plant themselves in Geto's heart. Doubling back, near the end of the scene, the two are framed in such a way that show the serious and stark division in their thoughts, with Gojo bathed in the unsettling red of the hallway and Geto in the bright white lights of the congregation room. What's interesting about the shot is the difference in how the colors are used. On Gojo's side of the divide, the red is mostly consistent from top to bottom and left to right, showing that in this moment his anger and regret over the situation are consistent, stabilized feelings. Him holding Riko's body instead of Geto also acts as symbolism for what's at stake when it comes to the worldview Gojo held at the beginning. Riko's death is the direct result of someone being weak and unable to protect themselves. Gojo's recognizing that the strength he has is itself a responsibility. It's pretty accurate to say he's going through his own great power, great responsibility struggle right now. Gojo is not used to failure, especially failure of this magnitude, so it was a real wake-up call for him. Not to mention, Gojo's in the hallway, so while the hallway itself is red to mirror his emotional state, he's headed in the direction of an eventual exit, meaning he'll come out on the other side of these painful feelings in due time. On Geto's side of the divide, the white of the lights envelop the entire top corner of the frame, symbolizing where his head is at, which is firmly on the side of duty, doing the right thing, and protecting the weak. However, as you move down the frame, the blinding white light, that dutiful idealism, is slowly fading into a creeping darkness that is forming around his legs just out of frame. This notion is further emphasized in the following shot where we get a top-down view and Geto himself is beginning to radiate the very darkness he's given so much of his time trying to fight off. Yet, Geto isn't in a hallway like Gojo, he's in the room where the creeping darkness has no choice but to fill the space he occupies. There's no way out other than the way he came in, so unless he's willing to truly face himself and reconcile with his feelings, he'll never come out on the other side of these emotions. Symbolically, the door is still open, as if to say the best way forward is to follow his friend the way he always has. But it's tough to see in the dark, and when Geto's darkness inevitably fills that space, the door will be locked from the inside. In the time following Riko's death, while life seems to be returning to normal, it's clear from Geto's face that the events still weigh pretty heavily on him. He's got bags forming under his eyes that get more and more prominent as the episode goes on. Gojo wonders if Geto has lost weight, and he asks if he's okay, falling back into that role of best friend the way he always had. But his approach is noticeably less abrasive and snarky now. There's still some playfulness to it, but it's dialed back. Unfortunately, as of late, Gojo is being sent off on missions alone due to his recent rise in strength, and their peer Shoko was never sent on dangerous missions at all, which meant that Geto was more and more frequently being sent on missions alone too. His increased isolation and uptick in absorbing cursed spirits brought to the surface the awful taste of the spirits themselves, and he begins to question what he's even doing it all for. The events of Riko's death still haunt him and have him spiraling into a deepening depression. Having seen firsthand the ugliness residing in humans, he tried to tell himself such wasn't uncommon and to stay the course with his duty to protect humans, but the more he thought about the situation, the more his resentment grew. There's a moment when an underclassman, Hibara, says he's a good judge of character, and Geto questions how he can say that while sitting next to him. Hibara doesn't pick up on what he means and just brushes over it. This exchange is indicative of how easy it is to miss signs of depression in the people we care about, and how that obliviousness can cause the person suffering to feel unseen or invalidated, which leaves them feeling even more alone. A chance run-in with a sorcerer named Yuki puts the idea in Geto's head about creating a world without cursed spirits. Like I mentioned earlier, cursed spirits are born when cursed energy leaks out of humans and builds up. However, Jujutsu sorcerers regulate the flow of their own cursed energy so very little actually leaks out, making it so that cursed spirits aren't born from sorcerers, pending a few exceptions. So if everyone was a Jujutsu sorcerer, the world would essentially be free of cursed spirits. Geto's first response to this notion is that you could solve the problem by just killing all non-sorcerers. It's a reply that surprises even him with how casually it comes out, really hammering home how far he's slipped out of the light this quickly. He's asked if he hates non-sorcerers, and Geto says he doesn't know, adding that as of late, the value of standard humans has been fluctuating in his mind. After the untimely death of Hibara, who was killed by a cursed spirit, and seeing more of the ugliness of humanity, Geto comes to reject his duty as a Jujutsu sorcerer who protects non-sorcerers. In his mind, if all that waits at the end of his duty are piles of the corpses of the people he cares about, then it isn't worth it. Instead, he sets his mind to a darker path and decides to exterminate all non-sorcerers. After Geto slaughters an entire village, Gojo is informed of the events and is told that Geto has subsequently been sentenced to death. Gojo is understandably in disbelief that Geto would do anything so heinous, especially after being told Geto killed his own parents. It's understandable for your knee-jerk reaction to be shock, denial, and even anger when the person you're closest to does something awful, whether that be to you or to someone else. There's a faith you put in your best friend that they'll uphold and embody the values and principles that brought you two together in the first place. It can be shattering when confronted by aspects of that person that clash with who you are on such a deeply fundamental level, even more so when you know their actions are going to drive you apart if something isn't done, assuming anything even can be done. When Gojo locates Geto, the two have one final confrontation in a crowded area. Even upon finding him with the execution order, Gojo still takes the time to try to get through to his friend. It's a deeply relatable reaction, trying to give your best friend every benefit of the doubt you possibly can in the hopes that there's some understandable reason for their behavior. You want so desperately to be convinced of their line of thinking because you feel like if you can be convinced, their overall betrayal of your friendship and feelings won't hurt nearly as bad. Gojo brings up what Geto said in the underground compound, how they weren't allowed to kill when there was no point to it. But for Geto, now there is a point to what he intends to do, and in his mind, it's for the best. The divide between them only cements when Gojo tells Geto there's no point in him chipping away at a task like killing all non-sorcerers when it would be impossible. But Geto turns this back at him, saying if Gojo was the one in his place, he wouldn't be viewing it as impossible. It's another one of those things that can quietly creep into a friendship for any number of reasons, whether intentional or not. The act of putting someone down without meaning to because of a perceived difference in strength, skill, or experience. Instead of encouraging someone or lifting them up so they can succeed, we pull a Gojo and try to convince them not to pursue or engage with something because we perceive it to be impossible for them, but not for us. Everyone has been guilty of this at some point in their life, myself included. It's also important to point out that on Geto's side of this equation, while he's right to draw attention to Gojo's arrogance, his stance is coming from a place of frustration and resentment for Gojo's continued growth and acknowledgement as the strongest sorcerer. Geto not only failed to protect Riko, but was also subsequently defeated by her assassin with relative ease. Yet Gojo was able to recover from his own defeat and then easily overcome that same assassin. Watching your best friend outpace you in life can be disheartening and deeply frustrating, even more so when struggling with depression. At a certain point, it's natural for a disconnect to be born from that, especially when the issue isn't addressed. With that, Geto announces that he intends to live his life the way he sees fit, in a way that will get him closer to his ultimate goal. When he begins walking away, Gojo raises his hands to attack, but struggles to bring himself to do so. Even Geto acknowledges that there would actually be a point in killing him, so if Gojo wants to, then go for it. But Gojo doesn't want to kill his best friend, he wants to save his best friend from going down the path he's on. He wants to preserve the version of his friend that exists in his memories, the one who laughed and joked and bickered with him. I can't say I blame Gojo for wanting to outright reject who it is his best friend became, because this new version has no room for their friendship in his life anymore. Gojo is essentially watching all of the memories he's made stop mattering to someone that he cares a great deal for. Even though we know Geto still cares about those memories, that isn't how it feels for Gojo. He may be the strongest sorcerer, but even he doesn't know how to prevent his best friend from leaving him behind. On top of that, by failing to kill Geto when he had the chance, Gojo now has to shoulder the responsibility that the bodies his friend leaves in his wake will be on him to some degree too. In the ending for this set of episodes, there's a moment where Gojo and Geto are both framed with a fish swimming by them, one white and one black. Gojo's eyes track the black fish, which I feel has two meanings based on the arc the pair are on. On one hand, it's representative of the darkness in the world that Gojo is aware exists within humanity, but it has never stopped him from doing his job. He's never turned away from it. On the other hand, the blackfish can represent the concept of Geto's depression and overall mental state, and how Gojo only truly noticed it once it was already too late and had passed him by. Geto closes his eyes as the whitefish moves across the screen. Just like Gojo, I like to believe that there are two parallel meanings to this. On one side, you have the opposing view of Gojo's, where Geto closes his eyes to the good that exists within humanity, causing him to no longer see it at all. He's purposely turning away from it now. On the other side, the whitefish can also represent Gojo himself, both his continued growth as well as his difference in perspective. Geto closes his eyes to this because he can no longer continue to watch the gap grow between them, but he also knows they're no longer on the same path and is preparing to go his own way. But that's just what I take away from this snippet after revisiting this particular arc. Pivoting elsewhere, there's a scene in the movie where Geto shows up at Jujutsu High to declare war, and after the brief confrontation, both he and Gojo spend their respective quiet time looking back on previous conversations. One about Geto's previous feelings regarding how the strong should protect the weak, then the pair's final conversation after Geto's flip to the dark side. The way this scene is handled does a stellar job of emphasizing how important these moments were to both men, and the quiet sadness that comes with those memories. Even at the end, when Geto is on death's doorstep, the two show a respect for one another, with Gojo saying he sent two of his juniors up against Geto knowing they'd lose because he trusted Geto wouldn't kill young sorcerers without a reason, still harkening back to that old conversation. This gets Geto to reflect back on happier times when he and Gojo were still the best of friends, remarking that he wasn't sure he still had any of that trust left. This exchange really stands out in how relatable it feels to be in either character's shoes. On one hand, you have Gojo, who despite everything Geto has done and their friendship falling apart, still had a strong sense of trust in the good-natured elements of Geto that had been buried beneath the darkness. I can genuinely relate to the idea, desire, and act of still wanting to see and place faith in the good you know still exists in somebody even after you've parted ways. Because on some level, you know the version of the person you cared about is still in there somewhere, and you just hope one day your words and feelings truly reach them. On the other side, you have Geto, who understands just how much heartache he's left in his wake, not just for Gojo, but for all of the people who cared about him at Jujutsu High. He understood and was willing to accept that the people he looked back on so fondly would never trust him again, so to discover that the person he considered his best friend still saw fit to trust him, even if in a roundabout way, must have felt great. Trust once broken or taken away can rarely, if ever, be restored to how it was or given back. The bridge of their friendship had been on fire for some time, but never quite burned down, and both men were standing on their respective sides, hoping one day the other would come to their side of it. Before Geto dies, he says that despite the hatred he developed for non-sorcerers, he never held any hatred for those at Jujutsu High. But he goes on to say that he just couldn't wear a heartfelt smile in this world, which is a sentiment that likely resonated with a lot of people given the current state of the world and their place within it. Even here at the end, the two continue to refer to one another on a first-name basis. They recognize that even though their ideals could no longer coexist and they were forced to go their separate ways, that they still cared about each other. Life divided them in a drastic way, but on each side of that chasm were best friends who just really wished things could have been different. It's ultimately Gojo that ends Geto's life, which I can only imagine how devastating that had to have been for him. You don't stop being someone's best friend overnight, and on some level, that flame of friendship never truly flickers out. For some people, it remains a tiny ember of hope, for others it's a small candle. The series explores this in subtle fashion, but does touch on the idea that friends walking out of your life leaves a different kind of void behind that's unique. To further illustrate this, there's a moment before Geto dies where Gojo says something that the audience isn't made privy to. By Geto's reaction, it's clear that whatever Gojo said, it was positive. This absence of information naturally led to fan speculation, and when the mangaka was asked about it, it was revealed that the hidden phrase was spoken elsewhere in Jujutsu Kaisen 0. This sent fans to scour for an answer, and the most commonly accepted one is what Gojo says when he's returning Yuta's ID to him. In this exchange, Yuta assumes Gojo was the one that found it, but he denies it and says this instead.
Yeah. 僕じゃない。僕の親友だよ。たった一人のね。
Gojo is one of those characters that tends to keep his cool, even in the face of powerful adversity and high-ranking authority figures. We rarely get to see him be vulnerable, particularly around other characters, so his admission here is heartbreaking and poignant. In this moment, he's acknowledging that his friend is gone. The candle in his heart that yearned for reconciliation had finally flickered out. Which is what makes the eventual confrontation between Geto and Gojo during the Shibuya incident so gripping to watch. Up to this point, this version of Geto operated in the background like a puppeteer. Appearing in front of Gojo was a tactical move designed to further his own goals, which, again, I'll go into on a deeper level in a more dedicated Jujutsu Kaisen video. So if you're interested in seeing me analyze the series the way I did for Yu Yu Hakusho, make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss it when it goes up. Anyway, when Gojo hears the voice of his long-dead friend, he freezes up, as anyone would. Despite Geto's death being quite some time ago, Gojo wouldn't mistake the voice of his best friend. When he turns to face him in utter disbelief, all of those memories of his best friend come flooding back, and for a moment, he's happy. Yet he's very much aware that his Geto is dead, and regardless of what his senses tell him, his soul is telling him that this isn't the person he cared about and ultimately mourned. And he's right, because it turns out that after Geto's death, Gojo didn't allow for a proper disposal of his body. He was trying to show consideration for his late friend, which superseded standard protocol, and it came back to haunt him. Who our best friends are shape who we are during eras of our lives. From how we dress, to the music we get into, to the words we use, to the types of humor we find funny, and so on. These become pieces of who we are through that shared sense of camaraderie in the face of the mundanity and often arbitrarily harsh nature of day-to-day life. So when that slot is vacated for any number of reasons, it's understandable to feel lost while shifting into whatever era of your life is coming next. It's understandable to be angry, to be heartbroken, and it's understandable to still want that person to come back, to be the people you were before. And that's what made revisiting this particular plotline so engaging, but also kind of hard to stomach, because in various ways it mirrors the sudden and stark disconnect between my best friend and I. I can see pieces of myself and of them in both characters, and when art imitates life to such a personal degree, it can be uncomfortable and distressing. But something I learned from my friend was that at times it's important and often enlightening to sit in those feelings of discomfort. It's important to allow yourself to just feel the things you're trying to avoid, even when it would be more convenient to box it up and bury all of it. You can't replace a best friend. You can only carry aspects of them with you and make a new friend that becomes the best friend for whoever you are in the next era of your life. But sometimes one particular friend stands out as someone you never wanted to lose, as someone you thought, especially as an adult, that they'd just continue to be there. My mom always taught my siblings and I that there are different types of people that come into your life. Most people are like the leaves on a tree, there for a season or two but eventually split off and blow away with the wind. Some people are like branches, sturdy and they stick around for a while, but you need to be careful which branch you apply pressure to because you never know which one might break or when. And lastly, a select few people make up the roots of your tree. These are the people that make up the foundation of your support system, are there come hell or high water, and keep you upright when all you want to do is fall over. The people that have experienced you at your worst but can always see the best in you. However, my mother also taught me that the people that leave your life were meant to teach you some sort of lesson, whether about yourself or just life in general. And nothing feels quite as bad as watching someone you thought was one of your roots become a lesson. Sometimes we're Gojo and sometimes we're Geto. Sometimes we're the one hurting someone, sometimes we're the one being hurt. Sometimes we're the one leaving, and sometimes we're the one being left. And yet, life goes on. It'll be different, but it does go on. So, to my friend, I'm not sure you'll ever see this, but if you do, I'm genuinely sorry that we couldn't reconcile the differences that ultimately pulled us apart. I wish you nothing but the best, and I hope there's a future out there where we can look back on everything with softer hearts and find common ground. Whatever life holds for you, I'll continue to root for you because we never stopped being on the same team. For everyone else, check on your friends. Ask them how they're doing. Be present in the moment and tell them you care. Let them know they're not alone out there. You never know how much just reaching out might mean to someone. I know I say this all the time, but I genuinely mean it when I say please remember to take care of yourselves and others. I'll see you guys again soon, and as always, thanks for watching.